Dickinson PD, off the cuff, episode number 1. We're here, we're doing it, and so a lot of smiles in the room here. Definitely a new thing for the Dickinson PD for the listeners that are just teeing off with this, but been something we've been talking about for quite a while, and so get into that a little bit. I think it's important maybe for the listeners out of the gates. We'll start off with some of the individuals here in the room and kind of go around the horn. Not all of them have mics right now, but everybody equally is important to what we're going to be trying to accomplish here. So it goes by a lot of different names: father, husband, coach. But here in our walls, we know him as Chief. And so I'll kick it over to Chief Dassinger maybe right away for a quick intro, and then keep working around the horn.
You know, this is exciting. Like Kylan says, we've been trying to plan this for quite a while, and today's a big day, and we're kicking off our first podcast off the cuff. And is there a better day to kick it off than National Donut Day? Think about that once. You know,
Yeah.
I was greeted this morning at work with donuts. You know, Baker Boy came in, donated a bunch of donuts for us. What perfect day to kick off our National Donut Day with our first introductory podcast. So pretty exciting. Like Kylan says, this is gonna be really a humanistic approach to law enforcement and to law enforcement in Western North Dakota, and just kind of talk a little bit, I guess, as far as a brief bio of myself, and later Kylan and later Lieutenant Hanel, who's the master blaster behind the machine. Later, we'll get to him later in the third seat. But I grew up in Western North Dakota, originally from South Hart, North Dakota. Home of the Eagles at that point in time. Now they're the Heart River Cougars, but when I graduated high school, they were still called the Eagles. It's tough to forget that mascot. But I graduated in South Hart. After that, I attended Dickinson State University. Later, attended University of Mary, UND Lake Region. So kind of a homebody. Never meandered too far from Western North Dakota, and it's certainly a great place to have grown up and to have raised my family now in Western North Dakota. So. Been a police chief for about 10 years, worked for the city of Dickinson as a police officer for about 21 years. Prior to that, I did a short stint up in the city of Williston as a police officer, a great learning experience for me. And I got my first real police officer position working for the city of Medora. So that was a great summer job. I enjoyed that a lot. Be a great retirement job someday to go back for a couple of years and
Right.
Be a police officer in the city of Medora. But that was a great experience. I enjoyed the interaction with the tourists and working with some of the park rangers and the Billings County Sheriff's Department. So that was really a great first career for me as far as a law enforcement job. So that's just kind of a brief background of me, I guess, right now. I'm married, got 3 kids. Oldest is in college. Youngest is going to be a sophomore here in high school, and so keeps me busy.
Yeah, no doubt, Chief, you are busy. And how many years total now in the position for you, for the listeners?
It's going to be 10 years coming up here, and it's been a great experience for me. Time has gone really fast. I've been very fortunate to surround myself with really great people every day to work around and to help direct our department and our community. And we've survived some bumps in the road during my tenure so far. Survived the oil boom, really rapidly growing department where we've come to. We started out with roughly about 23, 24 sworn members entering the boom, and now we're going to be sitting at about 44 sworn members. So our department has grown a lot. Moved into this new facility, the Public Safety Center, from our old home at the Law Enforcement Center. So we've definitely experienced a lot as a department together.
Yeah, and he doesn't have a mic in front of him right now for all the listeners, and so I'm going to try to plug in some of this here, and I hope I don't butcher it on his behalf, but it goes by LT and Mike, Lieutenant Hanel, kind of whatever the flavor of the day is and whatever he's doing. He wears a lot of different hats for the agency and been here for a long time. He's at the top of the tree when it comes to tenure. Who would have thought that would ever been the case, Mike, for us, as you look at that and think about how fast time goes. But another local, born and raised guy, got family here in the area, and Dickinson High grad, I know, and he'll probably do more of his own sort of plug and play when we get him a mic, because Chief and I had just kind of talked at the beginning that I think it's important for him. He's got a plethora of experience, and maybe that just kind of takes me a little bit into the backdrop on this whole thing and the concept. I mean, Mike, you and I talked, I think, back in the fall of 17-ish about this and bounce us off of each other and seeing if it was going to stick. And over the course of time, and Chief, started to hear it a little bit more, and it's like he started to get the wheels greased a little bit there, and then he makes the call for us to be here and now with it. So it's pretty exciting with everything that we're dealing with right now. I mean, podcasting definitely isn't anything that's new to the listeners and anybody that's, trying to hear what we're going to be about on this as it moves forward. But kind of initially when we started talking and some of the ideas you and I had bounced off of each other, and we got Chief involved in more of the conversation. People are like, what, how are you guys going to go with this thing? What are you going to talk about, and kind of pushing back a little bit like, well, is there going to be that much you guys are going to be able to expand on? And then you kind of look in the room and you think about, you got over 50 years of experience here that you can share with our community, that we probably got problems if we can't find something to talk about from a taxpayer side of it, I guess. So some humor on that end of it. But for my own end of it, my name's Kylan Klauser. I'm a born and raised Montana guy here, so I'm kind of the black sheep of the group. These guys are local folk by that standard. This is the first year can say I've lived in North Dakota longer than I ever lived in Montana, so pretty proud about that. 701 versus the 406. And so graduated Baker, Montana, Baker Spartan, came and played football over here for DSU and graduated from DSU back in 05. Was pretty blessed to be able to be hired by the Dickinson PD right out of the gates. Just kind of, they'd take me, and very appreciative of that and the path that they set me down. So now about 15 years, again, I'm the low-ranking guy in that end in the group, Chief with the longest tenure, and then Mikey with the second most there. But got my family here. Love the community itself, and over time have tried to be more vocal about that, and how proud I am to be a member as such. So it's been good. And again, the excitement to be able to be here with you guys and to be able to start this down the road is, we probably won't be able to say it enough, and probably every podcast try to blow up on that a little bit. So I think maybe right out of the gates here, Chief, I don't know, you talked a little bit during your intro on like the humanistic element and stuff, and for the listeners, maybe I think they're gonna want to know, like, okay, well, we're gonna hear this off the cuff, Dickinson PD, men and women in blue. What can we expect from them as this thing goes down the road? And I said a little bit ago, I mean, there's other law enforcement podcasts that are out there right now, and we definitely are trying to, I think, be unique in that same sense. But maybe you can talk a little bit about your vision and stuff for what we're looking to accomplish with the community and the listeners that are tuning into us.
Certainly, I think the biggest thing is that we want people to know that law enforcement officers are not robots, and we really want to make sure that this podcast really shows the human approach to law enforcement, and really get to know some of the staff members of the Dickinson Police Department. This program, we're going to bring in some guests from within the police department, some officers, sergeants, and so forth, to talk a little bit about their experience and really who they are in our community. And we'll touch on some things, some of the concerns in our community as far as law enforcement related issues. Also kind of touch on some of the community aspects, what's going on in our community, and occasionally bring in some special guests from outside the community, outside the law enforcement world, to talk about what's going on in our community. But I think the biggest selling point for me to move forward with this podcast is really communicate with the public as far as, law enforcement officers are human, Dickinson Police Department officers are human, and show that there's an emotional tie to everything that we do as a police officer, and we're not robotic. And decisions that police officers make in split seconds, a lot of times, that the Monday morning quarterbacks get to be scrutinized in the court system for hours. And what police officers do on the street is not in a controlled environment. It happens very fast, and they have very important decisions to make that oftentimes affect our life decisions to make in split seconds.
Yeah, I think jump in on that. I think, over the course of time, there's so much of the community and culture that's had a focus on law enforcement through the lens of, Hollywood and the detached manner as such. And I think one of the great things about these podcasts gives us the availability to accomplish some of those things you talked about right there. That, before you were ever chief, you were Dusty and things like that for people to kind of hear and understand, and from our end too. I think hopefully it'll help bring our employees closer with the community and some of the conversations that we can garner off future episodes and stuff. So
I think one thing that we've always prided ourselves in is the community interaction, involving the department personnel with a variety of community interaction, and that's another important aspect of this podcast is talk about some things that we're going to be doing in the community interaction, and we're always coming up with new ideas and how to interact with the public, and the podcast is really just another way of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you go to Mikey's history page on our website, and go from 1899 all the way to 2021, and all the stuff from the agency in between that I think is the developments and progress for the community here will be pretty special as we start to interject more of those as things go along. And then it's, you can't, the elephant in the room, I mean, is kind of like, 2020, with all of the current events and things that are happening. I know some of those early discussions with Mike and with you, Chief, were kind of centered around the impacts of all of that, and how lucky, you guys always talk about we are here with this community and being able to work and serve these people here in Dickinson, and, and that this would hopefully give us an opportunity to highlight, how important that is, or how great they are, because sometimes I think they live here and they maybe become immune, or we might even lose track as a community on how lucky we are, because it's so good here. It's such a great place to raise a family and to serve from a public safety standpoint.
It certainly is. I mean, the support that the law enforcement community gets from the city of Dickinson residents in western North Dakota is it's amazing. It really is. We're somewhat isolated from what's seen in other parts of the country right now as far as the attitudes towards law enforcement. We see it to some small degree, but nothing what a law enforcement officer is dealing with in other parts of the country right now.
Right, for sure. I think there's some credit maybe at the beginning of this. We'd be remiss if we didn't give some acknowledgement as this started. And so I know Chief, he was big on trying to get some department input and participation from employees and buy-in as such as we move forward with this. And from our logo to the name and some things. And so you guys will have to help me out and interject if I get some of this wrong. But I believe Jesse Kraft up in dispatch, one of our 911 communicators, she was ended up being the lucky winner, I guess, of all the different stuff that was submitted with the name and the logo. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, she's very artistic, and definitely what I did is I had put out an email to staff members asking, hey, if you have any ideas as far as what the logo should look like, or the name of our podcast, and had several submittals, and Jesse submitted the name of Off the Cuff. I like the name of that. Thought it fit, because we're definitely going off the cuff with what our running with this show moving forward. And she really designed a really nice logo as well. So thanks to Jesse for her creativity and helping us out with this. Yeah,
guys, that's one thing about us is the personalities that usually fit into the uniform and stuff. That artistic side like that sometimes can escape us. So yeah, it's definitely good to have guys, people like Jesse around us. So maybe we could talk a little bit, Chief, on plant some seed with some prospects we've talked about bringing on. You talked about in-house and definitely trying to get as many of our own people meet the officers on board here as possible as it goes. It seems like a given for those that are listeners right now. But some of the prospects out in the community, maybe we'll be reaching out to. If they hear this, they can kind of get a little spoiler alert that we're coming their way to ask them.
Certainly, we can, obviously, like I mentioned before, we'll be, talking to some of our internal staff members. I already had a conversation with our SRO Sergeant Brandon Stockey to kind of give him a heads up that, before the school year is going to start here, he'll definitely be one of our guests to talk about some of the concerns that are going to be going on in moving forward with the next school year. But externally, most certainly, I've already kind of given a warning to, the new city administrator, Brian Whittingham, that we'd like him to come on as a guest to our show and maybe talk about some of the activities that's going on in our community. Our community is actually pretty busy. There's a lot of projects that are on the table. A lot of people are excited about it. Especially the Downtown Square project is really really moving forward, and that's going to be an excellent project for the city of Dickinson. I talk about the sports complex. Maybe we can get an official from DSU or our Park and Rec to come on to our show and talk a little bit about that. There's just a lot of momentum moving with a lot of different projects in town. I hope we can get Brian on the show and talk a little bit about that. Get Mayor Scott Decker on the show, kind of maybe also talk about some of what his vision is for the city of Dickinson moving forward. Maybe some politicians, some representatives as well. Talk a little bit about how the legislative recap and where they really see the state of North Dakota going forward in the future. But I think the guest is really going to be endless moving forward with that, and I'm excited about that. And we're kind of looking for maybe about a show roughly 45 minutes in length, roughly. For each podcast, and a variety of guests. First half of the show, we kind of discussed roughly that we'd hold it as a more of a loosely law enforcement orientated project, and then the rest of it would be what's going on in the community with special guests.
Yeah, no, the Master Blaster that you're hearing his voice right now, right? But Mike, we talked about the capabilities with the technology and stuff, maybe bringing on some other law enforcement executives across the state, whether it be Kelly Lieben from, down at Burleigh County, Sheriff, Jesse John, Cass County, Chief Drayovich, Bismarck PD, maybe bring in some of these other chief executives as well to do some ad lib for, community trends and stuff, because, it's North Dakota, and although we are our own community, we're all pretty closely tied in across the state. And I think one that maybe, the beginning listeners, as we start to spread the word here and try to gain some popularity, a name that we talked early on and getting back here is former Chief of Police, Chuck Rummel. He was a 34-year guy for the agency, did investigations, I know, for about 14, 15 years. I think his stint with Chief was about 7 years. Is that right?
It's about right, yep.
And so kind of a Johnny Talker of sorts, and he has a gift of gab and experienced a lot of, I think, probably pretty cool things back in the 80s and stuff that I know, we're going to continue to go on this, but Mike, he's our history buff here for the agency, and so anything that's Dickinson Police Department history related, he's people listening and reaching out to us, he's a guy that you want to shoot those questions to, because he's got an answer to almost all of that. And but anyways, maybe getting like Chuck on here and talking about some of those old cases and stuff that were before our time. I know we talked earlier before this morning, right when I came in, Chief, and you mentioned one right offhand. Maybe for some of the listeners, that was a big one for us back in the 80s.
There was a big murder case back in the 80s that Chuck had worked as an investigator, and I actually think that there's a book written about it, actually, and it was the Swanson murders. And I think it'd be really interesting to the viewers or listeners out there to have a conversation with Chuck about it and talk about his experience in working that case. But that's just one of many cases that he's worked. Back in the 80s, the first boom, in a sense, and Dickinson was really an interesting time to work as a police officer, I'm sure, in the first boom and live in the community. So really hoping to get Chuck on this show and talk about some of those experiences.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good lead-in, too, to giving ourselves a little bit of a buffer. Because certainly when that was one of the things a lot of the people that were questioning about the parameters of this podcast and off the cuff is they wanted to know about old cases. They want to know, people in this community are very concerned about, each other, and so want to know what's going on. And we're going to be exploring, I think, as many of those as we can for entertainment value for people out there. But then there's also going to be some stuff I think hopefully people can, hear us and say, we're not going to be able to talk about this or going to be able to talk about that just yet, with things that may be tied up, whether it's in the court system and or just because of, recency and all that stuff, respect for our community and our citizens and stuff. So I want to throw that out there just a little, because I know that once we get going and we get these conversations going, there's people are going to be shooting stuff in and wanting to hear about different things that have happened here in the community. So.
Certainly, the Swanson, I think, got its name because there used to be a motel in Dickinson called the Swanson Motel, and I believe that murder occurred like in the early 1980s, maybe like 1981. So that's an exciting one. We'll have to get on the horn with Chuck to see when he could come on a show with us.
Yeah, no. I'm excited. I think that you throw those personal conversations in with all the other stuff that the communities, you follow our Facebook page. And for anybody here listening, and if you haven't yet, make sure to get on there and follow it. But Mikey, he's our guy on that, and does like a phenomenal job with promoting the agency through his alter ego on there. And it's I think we have over 10,000. Is that right? About over 10,000 on there, and it's continuing to grow. It seems like every day, but. Shoot some communication through Mike and stuff for those they're listening to for questions or feedback. I think that's our biggest one as we move here, is to just continue to try to build this echo chamber. Might not be the best word there, but I mean, this pipeline of information, this pipeline of communication back and forth, and trying to get this narrative on here, I think, as free flowing as possible. We looking at a format as we go through here that we're kind of trying to track, but we want authentic and genuine, conversation from our guests, and I think from each other. I think it's safe to say, huh, Chief?
I believe so, and we'll kind of touch on some numbers and stuff and some trends that we're seeing too in our community. Periodically, some numbers and some some crime data and stuff like that. And Kylan, in charge of investigations, if there's something that you feel you should be talking about, or some trends that we're seeing. Obviously, right now it's been busy. It seems like there's an uptick in activity in our community. Our calls for service is slightly up. We're seeing that trend. In April, we responded to almost 2,500 calls for service. We were at 2,415 calls for service. Seen a slight uptick in that. And one thing that we're seeing too is not just the slight increase in calls for service, but the severity of the calls.
Yeah.
They've definitely are there.
They are, and I think you hear that number that you just said out loud. Almost 2,500 calls for service, and the question you pose to a lot of groups that you get in front of is always like, well, how many officers are working at one time? How many are on duty at one time? And I think in a best case force right now, you get seven officers, 7 squad cars running around, and I only say that to highlight the fact it's like they're busy. I mean, it's just like, we're seeing it from our perspective as supervisors and, people in the department that have been here for a long time. But, our new officers and those that are out there right now, as first responders and those, for those people who need help, I mean, they're busy. And from an investigative standpoint, I mean, I can talk about that a little bit. Your day-to-day stuff has slowly uptick with the weather. That's always something that comes into play. But our big incidents are call-outs, that are always a good one for us. Those are on the uptick. Last year we were at an all-time high, and it looks like this year we're gonna beat that number again if the trend holds for the rest of the year. I think we were just about 80 plus last year, and so more than once a week we're having these investigators contacted and called out for things that patrol officers need help with. And so you got some. I think you brought a report in, Chief, right? The monthly report. Maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the other numbers.
Certainly, I could kind of touch on a little bit. This was the April monthly report that I had presented at the commission meeting. But we, like I said, we had responded to 2,415 calls for service in the month of April. But surprisingly, usually historically the weekends you would always think that Friday, Saturday's busiest time for Dickinson PD. It was kind of unusual last month in the month of April that some of the neighbors reporting calls for service. Any idea what was our busiest day of the week? Just taking a guess, if you didn't see this report prior?
Yeah, if I didn't see the report prior, I definitely would have held true to your first ones there, right? Your Friday, Saturdays just automatically come to the crosshairs. But
it was actually Wednesday. It was hump day. Now, I'm not sure what prompted that, but Wednesdays was our busiest day for calls for service in the month of April for neighbors reporting crimes. And what kicked that off, I have no idea.
When people ask about, trends and stuff I always respond from the investigative side of it. Winter months, the cold has always been a friend of ours in some way for keeping people, closed down in some regards. But definitely with the weather warming up here, we're seeing that uptick that.
And one thing we really benefited, because we really had a mild winter. We barely had any snow or ice on the roadways. And our calls for service in reference to traffic crashes was way down for the month of winter throughout winter, we were way down, and we even definitely seen that in the month of April. Our traffic crash numbers were down. We had responded to 51 total crashes in the month of April. Historically, that's much higher. We're still dealing with the snow and ice. 4 of those crashes were injury related, and 9 hit and run accidents for the month of April.
Yeah, there's one in there. I mean, you and Mike did a phenomenal job on the press release, but we obviously just had a real big one with a couple of our officers being involved in a shooting here recently. This is one of the worst things that an individual could ever have to deal with, and for our department has been quite a chore. I know you as a chief. This is going to be the 4th or the 5th one you've had to go through, I think, in your time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's about right. My chief, 10 years as tenure as a chief, and I believe this is the 5th officer-involved shooting that I've had to gone through, and every one is a little bit different, and every one affects the department administration and the officers involved a little bit different on each occasion.
Yeah, and I just bring that up because it's, the traffic stops and stuff like that are fairly easy, and there's a lot of those that happen. But from our department, it's just one of the worst things that any agency can have to go through, and it's some stuff there. I think for the listeners understand. I mean, there's a full spectrum of things here that your department's dealing with on a day to day, and we're all about trying to bring you guys into the intimacy and as much as possible, in respectful ways. So I just highlight that for those reasons to the listeners.
In the world of law enforcement, basically, it can go from sheer boredom to sheer terror in just a matter of seconds.
Yeah. And I think this format, along some of the other stuff, I mean, body cameras and all this stuff, the communities I think are fortunately able to see more and more of now are going to help us in the long term. I mean, there's always those knee jerks that we have to deal with, but their understanding of what really takes place here, not The Rock on Fast and the Furious 7, jumping from sky rises and stuff, but on a day-to-day, on a traffic stop, just a generic response is, I just think it's imperative for as we get going, and hopefully we'll be able to highlight that in good form and fashion for the listeners. Yeah,
there's no ordinary call in law enforcement. There really isn't. I mean, the risk is there if you're doing a traffic stop, serving a warrant, responding to domestic disturbance, or even an animal-related call. And, unfortunately, we deal with a lot of mental health-related stuff in our community, in which officers interact with mental health-related individuals. So there really is no ordinary call. You always got to keep your guard up and keep your senses up, keep your spider senses up.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, we could probably do an entire separate podcast on that one right there alone, and I know you guys in administration right now are heavily in the trenches and conversations with our mental health professionals here locally, trying to, work with that and make progress for those that are affected by this. And so, maybe that'll be some, when we go back to the guests and some of that stuff, we could reach out to some of our partners in that one, and I'm sure there's some people in the community that would like to hear about some of that progress at a kind of this kind of level, anyways, on the microphone. And
yeah, I certainly think that could be an episode in itself. Certainly we lack the mental health resources west of the river, and we continually try to increase those in the city of Dickinson and working with our partners and improving that. So hopefully we can make some improvements down the road. Yeah,
it's I think there's a lot of exciting stuff there. I mean, we're coming up on the 30-minute mark for the recording, and so hopefully it gives a little bit of a sliver and a taste of what's to come here down the road. This is just an audio recording today for you guys' pleasure, but I think our intent is to go with the video and audio, and so Mikey, he's working with that. And if anybody's ever, again, you go to our Facebook page and you follow us with some the techie stuff, the videos and all that good jazz. I mean, Mike does a phenomenal job with it. So I'm pretty excited to see how good that's going to look once we get going, and it'll should add another element to this whole thing, getting us on camera. Hopefully we don't look too silly as it goes along, but it's pretty excited about that. But I thought, we're going to do these segments, Chief. Mikey had brought some up, and one of them was going to be speed cuffing, and I thought maybe this would be a nice way we could close it out. Maybe we could get you kind of put on your heels a little bit with a couple questions for the listeners to be able to kind of, when we were talking about getting personal and understanding our officers and having a little bit of fun with it here. So With that, you think you're fair game for it, Chief?
I can't. I didn't get a chance to review the questions in advance, so I'll have to go off the cuff with these answers.
Okay. Well, Mikey is going to, we'll try to get this all taken care of in 30 seconds. So it'll be one of those you ain't going to be able to think about it. It's going to have to be speed cuffing. And for anybody who doesn't know what speed cuffing is, it's just in those tense and uncertain, rapidly evolving situations. It's how fast an officer can apply those handcuffs safely. So that's the gist behind it here. So you think you're ready, Chief?
Am I on the clock yet?
Not yet here, but as soon as I get your head nod.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, all right. Favorite band?
AC/DC.
Favorite movie?
Tombstone.
Fat Boy or Street Glide?
Street Glide.
Whitetail or Muley?
Mule deer.
Watermelon or Sour Apple Jolly Rancher?
Watermelon.
Okay. Favorite lift in the gym?
Bench press.
Favorite sports team?
Oh boy. I'm going to go with the big sticks. I've really lost my interest in professional sports lately.
Oh, okay. And last year but not least, favorite handgun? Favorite
Glock.
pistol?
Glock.
That's it. So, awesome. Well, I think maybe as we just wind down with that, kind of a fun way to end it and more to come. We'll get better as this goes along too. This is a warm-up and an intro, and we're looking for all kinds of feedback as it goes. So please, I think it's on an outro of sorts here. Mikey just wanted to make sure we get out to everybody. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon Music. Our YouTube channel is getting more and more popularity as it goes along. Mikey's very active on that. And then Facebook, you got the DM model that you can reach out for questions and feedback. So there it is. I think episode 1 in the books. Any last thoughts, Chief?
No, I'm excited about this moving forward, and great things to come out of this podcast. So please tune in.
Thanks, Chief.